Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Adam Clausen. He is the Director of Innovation and Social Impact, and he's formerly incarcerated. He's now an advocate and a national leader. And remarkably, he was sentenced to 213 years before getting out and now changing people's lives. So I'm really interested and at least kind of understanding your journey. We were talking earlier before we got on the air here about kind of my experience working with incarcerated people. So welcome, Adam, and maybe you can start by kind of telling us how you got to this point.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. I appreciate you having me on. Um, as I said prior to us going live, it's a truly incredible story. Hard to believe that I lived it, but it didn't start out that way. I ended up entangled in the justice system at an early age. Age 11, was on probation the first time, and it was something like I could never quite get out just when I'd be ready to get off supervision. I'd do something else to either violate or catch a new, infraction charge, whatever it was. And ultimately, when I was 18 years old, high school, should have been, getting ready to go off to college. I had all sorts of opportunities, was a standout athlete, had scholarship offers, and I just couldn't keep it together. I ended up, leaving home and basically, living in a motel, drinking, doing drugs, and committed a string of burglaries, robberies that led me to a state prison where I served about 3.5 years. And I did not learn any good lessons from that time. I didn't get the support, the resources that I need. I spent a lot of time playing ball, hanging out, did more drugs in prison than I ever did on the street. And when I got out at age 21, I had a GED, no work life experience, and I had violent crimes, violent felonies, and nobody wanted to give me a chance. So I very quickly got discouraged and fell right back into that same cycle, same people doing the same stuff, as crazy as that sounds, because I swore I'd never go back to prison, but I didn't see any path, any opportunity for me. Ultimately, I had a good run of about 2.5 years, where things started to fall apart. Really had no foundation. I violated my parole. The judge wanted to teach me a lesson. He threw me in Camden County Jail, which was like Beirut in the 90s. It was like the worst place you could possibly be. And somehow he thought I would get something positive out of that experience. I did not.
Is this in New Jersey?
In New Jersey, Camden County, New Jersey, right there on the river, right across,
Yep,
you can see the city. Um, the problem is I walk into that environment and everybody knows me.
right.
And I have a reputation, but it's not, it's for all the wrong reasons. And so 90 days later, I walked out the back door of the jail in flip-flops, bust pants, and a t-shirt. This is the East Coast, New Jersey, in January, mind you, right? Freezing. The only thing I have is a piece of paper that is telling me the bill for the cost of my 90-day incarceration. So they charged me for it. My car that was out front, impounded, towed, repossessed, it's gone. My house got sold out from underneath me. My belongings, my friends took real good care of those, put them in some trash bags and, put them in somebody's garage. Uh, all the money I had, anything that I had of value was gone. Over that 90 days, I realized how fragile my existence was. And I hit the ground running. I picked up the phone at the local McDonald's, down the street from the jail, called a friend, a guy that I had done time with in the States, said, "Hey, I need a ride, man. Come get me." And over the course of the next 3 weeks, he and I, along with a few co-defendants, committed a string of robberies that landed me in federal court because there was a lot of interest at that time for some organized crime figures, some things that were happening. And because of my involvement in drugs and all these other things, they thought maybe I had some information. So in order to get me to cooperate, they charged me with multiple firearm offenses. that all had mandatory minimums attached to them. So after the first conviction, you automatically get 25 plus 25 plus 25. And they said, hey, you're looking at forever. You either cooperate or you're done. Instead of putting someone else in that chair facing, similar amount of time, similar situation, I chose to go to trial. I lost every count. Admittedly, I did it, just to put that out there. And I ended up with that mandatory minimum sentence of 213 years, not months, years, 213 years. So I deeply regret everything that I did that led me to that courtroom, right? All of the people who were harmed in the process, everybody who got dragged through the investigation, family, friends, like there was a lot of people who were impacted by it. I still feel very guilty about that. But I'm grateful that I chose not to put someone else in that situation. That I ended up with the time, it stopped with me. I ended up then in federal prison, maximum security, level 6 maximum security, federal penitentiary, where I spent the next 10 years really figuring out who I was, why I kept making so many bad decisions, and figuring out how to get my life together. Went on this deep introspective journey. Physical fitness became my passion. I poured everything into that, gained as much knowledge as I could, to the point where I'm out on the rec yard, sun's coming up, and I got a group of who's who of American gangsters out there on the yard with me doing up dog, downward dog, sun salutations, as the sun's coming up. And I look around, I go, man, if anybody had a camera and they could picture this, like this is priceless, right? Strangely enough, in that level 6 maximum security penitentiary, I found peace for the first time in my life. And I had to go through a lot of things. I had to ultimately hit that fork in the road and make a decision of like, okay, this is it. This is either going to be my life. I will spend the rest of my days, in this prison cell in behind these walls, or I'm going to do something to earn a second chance, to get someone to take another look at me and say, you know what? Like, we got to figure out, okay, 213 years is pretty outrageous. What can we do, to give this guy another opportunity?
I feel like there are multiple levels to this, and we'll get on with your story, but I don't want to lose this point is that one thing I like about you is that you're upfront. You made mistakes. You seem like an honorable guy, because a lot of people, they end up throwing somebody else under the bus, and then they that's how wrongful convictions happen and all sorts of other bad stuff. So that's interesting. But like, you did a lot of bad stuff, but 213 years and is just ridiculous nonsense, in my opinion. And this was my access point. I was telling you about this earlier, to the criminal legal system, because when I saw the guy get sentenced to 378 years, and I didn't even know that he was wrongly convicted at that point. It was like this big giant light bulb comes on and says, there's something not right with this. Like, I get it, you commit a crime and you should do some time, but multiple lifetimes doesn't make a lot of sense. So what are you thinking, like, when you get this 213 years?
Sorry about that. I shouldn't laugh about it, but to be honest, like that was my response. So what happened was, I told you I was previously incarcerated. While I was serving time in the state system, met a guy's name is Kevin. Kevin worked in the law library, multiple life sentences. He would come out to the yard in the afternoon when the rest of us were out there. And as soon as the slider opened up, people would see him and they go, oh God, here comes Kev. Like, let me avoid this guy. Because he was just that miserable every day, all the time. The day that my jury came back, I knew because of the mandatory minimum sentences how much time that I had a life sentence. I had hundreds of years. And as the marshals brought me back into the cage, I sat there with my two co-defendants who went to trial with me, and I'm sitting there thinking, and I started laughing. These two guys look at me like, oh, he's lost it. He's cracking up. He knows he's getting a life sentence. He's done. And I just start laughing and I go, that's not going to be me. Like, I'm not going to be the miserable guy. I'm not going to carry this with me everywhere I go. I'm going to remain optimistic. I'm going to choose to believe that at some point, something positive, something good is going to happen, right? I am not going to allow this to define me. And as hard as it was, like, if I wouldn't have adopted that mindset early on, I probably would not be here today, right? Because it shaped everything that I did from that point forward. But that's not normal, right? Most people who end up with such an incredible 300 and however many years you said, like
Yeah.
that's crushing. Like to feel hopeless and desperate, like especially if you're someone who is innocent. Like
Yeah.
imagine that. That's
I mean,
outrageous.
I think it's worse to be innocent than guilty. At least guilty, you kind of accept that, okay, I screwed up. Whereas you're innocent, you're like, now what do I do?
But there has to be some equity, right?
Yeah.
And if there's not, when it's so imbalanced, what it does is minimize whatever that, whatever that person was convicted of. It minimizes everything else. Like if you gave me 213 years for a series of, they were serious crimes. But then, like, what do you do with, how is there a higher penalty? Like, is there a higher penalty? You don't really have it because it's ultimately the same outcome. So it diminishes, I think, what they're trying to achieve by, giving a long sentence.
And then another theme that comes to mind as you go from, 11 years old all the way up until the point where you get this multiple life sentence is that the system is fundamentally flawed. And I think this is where, we're going to talk about some of your work, but, um, you know, we make it really hard for people who get in trouble, even for a first time, to then get themselves righted. And you're unusual because you had a GED. A lot of these guys don't even have any kind of high school degree. And they do some time, they get released, they can't get a job because they got that on their record. Um, you know, um, Depending on what you do, you may not qualify for housing, you may not qualify for educational loans. And so, if we're trying to devise a system that's going to create people that are going to commit other crimes, we couldn't do it any better than what we have right now.
So true. Yes, agreed.
How do you get guys who have grown up, and a lot of them, grew up in really crappy conditions, they have broken homes, there's abuse, a lot of people were victims themselves of crime and then, carry that trauma and that anger and as they say, hurt people and so finding ways to kind of break that trauma and that cycle are so critical. And it seems like that's where you went with your career.
Very much so. So I knew from my first experience, all the all the things that could go wrang, right?
Hmm.
With doing time, getting out, being completely unprepared. And one of the things that I committed to early on, after I found myself, my passion for fitness, and I started helping people, I found a sense of purpose in that. I made a decision to do everything that I could to help others that I saw who were caught in that same cycle to help ensure that they were well prepared when they walked out the door, or at least as well prepared as they could be, right? Because as you said, the system is not designed to give people all the support, access to the resources, to the things that they need inside. It's purely to incapacitate, first and foremost. Like, this is your punishment. You're going to sit here. Safety and security is paramount. Like, so that means limited movement, limited access. We don't want you to have things, especially not technology. You know, the systems are afraid of that. Um, but then there are these pockets of programs where you see what happens when you give people access. And I was extremely fortunate for the second 10 years that I was in to be at a facility where there were administrators who chose to open up the doors, allow the University of Pittsburgh to come in, to allow Dr. Patrick Williams, Ellen Ritter to bring our life coach training program in, and to have some staff members who were willing to, they had the courage, I'm going to say they had the courage to step across that line, you know, because there's generally a defining line, like us versus them. A lot of times in, you know, correctional culture, that's what it is. And these staff said, you know what, we're going to invest in these individuals. We're going to support these programs that these guys clearly are interested in. They're investing in themselves, they're investing in each other. And over the course of that second 10 years, we built a community of incarcerated life coaches, first of its kind in the nation. And through that experience, we changed the culture, not just inside the prison, but the men who were a part of that went back to their communities and have done extraordinary things all across this country. And that's not by chance, that's not by luck. That's what happens when you give people access, right? Where we turn prisons into a place of growth, of education, of true restoration, right? Where they, for the first time, start to form healthy relationships, learn how to communicate, learn how to do all these things that, you know, normal society takes for granted, but that those of us who have been stuck in the system haven't really matured properly, haven't learned those behaviors or how to manage our emotions, how to deal, like haven't learned how to learn in the
Yeah.
first place. And to be a part of this community where I watched just incredible growth, I watched it transform my life. That became something that I was fully committed to. Carrying that, I knew that once I got an opportunity, I believed that I was going to get out at some point, that it was going to be my mission to make sure that I would bring this back and make sure that others had access to the same things that transformed my life. And that's a large part. That's what brings me to social purpose corrections, where, you know, I was told so many times, safety and security, we can't do that. And I'd have to like go find a correctional leader who said, oh, okay, we'll give you a chance. Well, now I work with a team of former correctional, you know, Brian Kane, who was on here previously. Brian was the head of security for 65 prisons, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is the safety and security guy. So when Brian and I first met, and he's like, I love this. He's like, this is my vision. This is what I want to do. I'm like, wow, we're speaking the same language. And you're the guy who's got all the safety and security, can say, we can do this. I was like, I need to work with you. So I was very fortunate. I was the first person hired on to social purpose corrections. It's been an amazing journey working with Brian, like sharing this big vision on how we intend to transform corrections. And it's based on, like, for me, what I bring is my expertise, my 10 plus years experience leading that community of coaches and seeing them thrive on the outside. Like, I get to go to different cities now and meet with them and see what they're doing. And it's extraordinary. Like, why are we not doing more of this?
Yeah. So, and I'll get back to that point in a second, but I want to kind of close the loop here. So, you're in federal prison, and a lot of people don't know there's no parole in federal prison. So, how in the world do you get out?
As I said before, I had to do a lot of things that had never been done before. organized a national reentry event inside the prison, which, believe me, like that was no small feat. Like they were like, if anything goes wrong, we got a place for you where you will never see the light of day again. And I'm like, okay, it's all on this. And, I had to build trust over time and brought in community partners and just drew so much attention to the good things that were happening that people started to take notice. And it happened to coincide with landmark criminal justice reform 2018. The First Step Act gets passed. First time we have bipartisan legislation, like, and it just squeaked through. Thank God, because I would not be here without it. Those mandatory minimums that gave me 213 years were repealed, except it wasn't made retroactive. So myself and approximately 3,500 other people, although we had these outrageous sentences that the court said you can never do this again, we were still stuck.
Yeah.
So a second part of the First Step Act was a change to what's called compassionate release. It's a vehicle that had been there, but underutilized because it had to go through the director of prisons. This opened the door and allowed us access to the court to kind of circumvent the old process. And I had an attorney who's a dear friend, formerly incarcerated gentleman who went on to Georgetown Law, became a law professor, frequent guest of the White House, who was advocating for these reforms, who personally oversaw my case, my petition. We got it back to the court and basically got the court to acknowledge that because of the change in the law and because of everything that I'd accomplished inside, that I had earned the opportunity to have my sentence revisited. Then there was a question of, well, how much time are we going to give them? And it's like, well, why not give them 30 years or 40 years? And it's like, these are crazy numbers. Like I've done over 20 years already. And we had to convince the court that not only had I done enough time, contributed enough, given back, but that I had a release plan. That if they were to let me out, I had the support, I had a job, I had all of these things waiting for me, which, let's be honest, if you've done 5 years, your connections are not going to be what they were when you went in. A decade, think about what changes in a decade, major changes. I've been down over 20 years, right? Like my social circle, all of my connections were through prison that had been cultivated in prison. And, so that was a big leap. The court ultimately granted me immediate release August 12th, 2020. My wife pulled up to the prison. The car was packed. We left from the East Coast, traveled over the next month out to the West Coast to here, Las Vegas, where we started a whole new life. And all of those big plans and dreams that we had are slowly coming to fruition.
So it's a great ending, and really, in a lot of ways, a horrible story. And unfortunately, so many people are caught up in this and not as fortunate as you, which is why I respect the fact that you're giving back to those people. I mean, one of the things that was really interesting for me is on Tuesday, so today's Thursday. So 2 days ago, I was in San Quentin. I was telling you about this before. And there were 175 incarcerated people in this program. It's called Humans of San Quentin. And their goal is to kind of humanize people, which is one of the things that you guys are doing. And it's one of my goals too, is that we kind of there's this word other people that are incarcerated, or we throw them in a cage and we lock the door and we forget about them. But these are human beings, and some of them made mistakes, some of them did pretty horrible things. I never ask people honestly what they do, because I want to get to know that who they are now, not who they were when they did whatever they did. I met guys there that are going to be getting out in 2 weeks. I met guys that are probably never going to get out, but for the grace of some miracle. But they got to share their stories, and they were so poignant. There was one guy, he had been able to organize a father-daughter dance, and he had been estranged from his daughter, and he got to dance with her. And then tragically, like 3 weeks ago, she died. And he gets up there and he tells this story, and he wasn't, able to go to her funeral. And literally, I will tell you, there was not a dry eye in the house when he's telling this story. And as he walks down, everybody's, giving him hugs and fist bumps and everything. And it was almost like this was his opportunity to kind of bury his daughter and be able to share this remarkable story. And there are so many of these people that, and here we are, in this big chapel, and there's 175 incarcerated people and probably 40 or 50 people from the outside. And there's like one or two correctional officers for this whole group of people. And you think, oh, are you afraid? Are you scared? No, there was never a problem, never even thought about it. Everybody's so happy and grateful for you to be there. It was just an amazing experience, and I wish people would be able to have the kind of experiences I've had, because you see people in a different light. And I think, one of the most important things is to understand that somebody who commits a crime doesn't stop being a person. And sometimes they did pretty horrible things, and they got to work through whatever that is. But, it seems like we need to give them opportunities. So tell us about your work now.
I mean, I am so incredibly fortunate. As I said, I am the first person hired on to social purpose corrections to be able to work with Brian. Our mission to transform, the culture in corrections all across this country, to bring wellness both to staff, to residents, to make these environments, more conducive to positive outcomes for everyone, right? Like, if we're going to send people to prison, like, we want to make sure, I don't care if you're a fiscal conservative and you want to return on your dollar, like, ask for some accountability. Like, you want people to come out better than they went in, right? And if you're more about, social aspects of justice, even more reason, like, we need people coming into our prisons, like restoring, that sense of dignity and self. So I'm very grateful to be a part of that. We're, currently working towards having our first contract. We're also exploring opportunities to come in to consult to help those other systems that are already doing what they do well. They just need a little bit of support and maybe building that out a little bit further. The other thing for me personally, I get to work with some other amazing organizations. Reform Alliance, their Advocacy Institute. I've been working with Reform for, I think, about a year now. Since before I even got out, I was, involved with FAM. Since I've been home, I've been, a frequent guest of FAM in DC, pushing for legislation. I testified before the United States Sentencing Commission, and that recently led to my appointment on the Sentencing Impact Advisory Group. For the next 3 years, I'll be working with the commission on guidelines on some of the proposed changes, and hopefully some of those which will help others who have those 924Cs that I was trapped under, will give them the opportunity to get back into court and have their sentence revisited. But we're also going to be working with the community, with the advocates, with the families, all of the other people who are impacted. So I'm incredibly grateful to have those opportunities, to have built, a network of other advocates, people with lived experience who are now, we see more and more of that, like, 15, 20 years ago, people with lived experience, like, you got out of prison and you were like, let me just bury my past, keep it as quiet as I can, and hope nobody finds out, and let me try and move forward with my life. Where now there's such a strong push. There's so much that's happening in the advocacy realm where, we're bringing this conversation more, into the mainstream where people aren't being as defined by their past as much. I'm saying it still happens. Like my name's still not on our lease because they're like, we know, you have an amazing story, background, all that's great, but we still can't have you on the lease. Like we just can't do it. So I'm like, okay, like we've made strides, but we still have a long way to go. So I feel like individuals like myself who have not just a great story, but now have a platform, like it's our responsibility to be out front, to be advocating for others, and to make sure that, the more stories, the more voices that are heard of people with lived experience, the more that we can help positively shape public opinion. So it's not the stereotypical guys in prison, women in prison, like all of these negative attributes and characteristics. And it's podcasts like yours that, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and to be able to share this. And hopefully people look at me and go, he doesn't look like a guy that did 20 years. Like, and I think that that's one of my gifts, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know I don't fit the stereotype, and that's what people need to see. They need to
Well, it's
know.
also why I like Brian because he doesn't fit the stereotype of the person that's the reformer.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. One of the guys that spoke, at San Quentin had all the face tattoos, and it kind of turned into this comedy routine, where he's making fun of himself. But the reality is, that guy gets out and he knows it, right? Like, what's he gonna do? Where's he gonna work with all these tattoos all over himself?
Yeah. I mean, that's a reality. So, um, yeah, I appreciate conversations like this, bringing it to the mainstream, sharing these stories, because there's a lot of success out there. There's a lot that we can focus on, right? There's a lot that needs to be fixed, but there's also a lot of good that's happening, and we're starting to gain momentum. And I'm grateful to be on that side, and I'm going to keep doing my part to, push things forward.
Yeah, and I feel like, even though there's been some backsliding on some of the issues that I really care about in the last few years, that the floor of our understanding at this point is so far ahead of where it was when I started in this space that I don't think we're ever going to go back to the bad old days. Like we may not be exactly where we want to be, but I think prisons have figured out that just locking guys in cages is not the way to fix this problem. And so we're starting to see programs, we're starting to see nonprofits from the outside, and we're even starting to see buy-ins from the people on the inside. They're like, look, if we can educate these folks, we can train these folks, we can help these guys heal, we're going to be safer too. So they have an incentive to do it right as well. They don't always do it right, but I think they're getting better too.
Agreed. Agreed. Definitely agreed.
Well, we're out of time. I could talk to you about this all day, and I'm sure you could talk to me about this all day as well. How can people learn more about your programs?
Uh, Come on, log on to SPC, Social Purpose Corrections. You can find us online. You can find us especially on LinkedIn. Brian's great about posting there. When he was on the show here with you, there was a ton of interest generated from the post that he created about coming on here, talking about, what a great conversation this was, how much people needed to tune in and listen to this. It gained a lot of attention for social purpose. So that's number one. Um, I'm on social media, but my social media is limited, right? Like my focus is really on just promoting the mission. Um, so yeah, I would say come online, check us out. Social Purpose Corrections. We have a ton of information out there, and you can see the rest of the team because Brian has done an extraordinary job of bringing together a group of leaders that have just such incredible backgrounds, who are all passionate about this and who have the credibility, right, to get behind this and to help transform the system to help us, you know, fulfill our mission. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we've been talking with Adam Clausen. He's the Director of Innovation and Social Impact. And this has been Everyday Injustice. My name's David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.